Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to talk with you today about something that every English learner struggles with. You know what I'm talking about, right? That moment when you're watching an American movie, or listening to a podcast, or even just talking to a native English speaker, and suddenly it feels like they're speaking a completely different language. The words are flying by so fast that you can barely catch one before the next three have already passed you by. Don't worry, you're not alone in this struggle. I've been teaching English for years, and I can tell you that almost every single student I've worked with has asked me the same question. They say, I understand English when people speak slowly, but the moment they start talking at normal speed, I'm completely lost. How do I fix this? Well, today we're going to dive deep into this problem, and I'm going to share with you all the secrets that native speakers use naturally, without even thinking about it. First, let me tell you something that might surprise you. Native English speakers don't actually speak clearly all the time. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. We blur words together, we drop sounds, we use contractions, and we speak in chunks rather than individual words. The good news is that once you understand how this works, you can train your brain to catch these patterns too. Think about it this way. When you learn to read in your native language, you didn't start by reading one letter at a time, right? You learned to recognize whole words, then phrases, then complete sentences. Listening to fast English works the same way. Your brain needs to learn to recognize chunks of sound, not just individual words. Let me give you a perfect example of what I mean. When native speakers say, "What are you going to do?" it doesn't sound like "What are you going to do?" Instead, it sounds more like "What ya gonna do?" All those sounds blend together into one smooth flow. This is called connected speech, and it's the first big secret to understanding fast English. Connected speech happens because native speakers are lazy, in a good way. Our mouths naturally want to move in the most efficient way possible. So instead of stopping after each word, we let sounds flow into each other. The end sound of one word connects with the beginning sound of the next word. Sometimes sounds even disappear completely, or new sounds appear to make the connection smoother. Let me break this down for you with some common examples. When we say going to, the sounds blend together and it becomes gonna. When we say want to, it becomes wanna. Let me becomes lemmy. Did you becomes didja. Would you becomes woulda. These aren't separate contractions that we memorize. They're natural sound changes that happen automatically when we speak at normal speed. Here's another important thing to understand. Native speakers don't emphasize every word equally. In English, we have something called sentence stress. This means that in every sentence, some words are stressed or emphasized, while others are unstressed or reduced. The stressed words carry the main meaning of the sentence, while the unstressed words are like the glue that holds everything together. For example, if I say I'm going to the store to buy some milk, the stressed words would be going, store, buy, and milk. These are the content words that carry the meaning. The unstressed words would be I'm, to, and some. These are function words, and native speakers say them very quickly and quietly. This is huge for your listening comprehension. If you're trying to catch every single word, you're going to struggle. But if you focus on catching the stressed words, you can understand the main meaning even if you miss some of the little words in between. Your brain can actually fill in the gaps automatically once you get used to this pattern. Now, let's talk about another challenge that makes fast English so difficult to understand. Different English accents have different rhythms and different ways of connecting words. American English has a different flow than British English, which is different from Australian English, which is different from Canadian English. But here's the thing. Once you understand the basic principles I'm teaching you today, you can apply them to any accent. American English, which is probably what you hear most often in movies and TV shows, has a very bouncy rhythm. We tend to drawl out our vowels, and we have something called the American R sound that colors a lot of our words. We also use rising intonation for questions and statements that show uncertainty, and falling intonation for statements that show certainty. Let me give you a practical exercise to start training your ear. Pick a TV show or movie that you've already watched with subtitles in your native language. Now watch the same episode or scene again, but this time with English subtitles. Don't worry about understanding everything. Instead, focus on one thing. Notice how the written words on the screen don't match exactly what you're hearing. This is connected speech in action. For example, you might see, "What do you want?" written on the screen, but what you hear sounds more like, "Whatcha want?" This is normal. This is how English really sounds when native speakers talk naturally. The more you notice these patterns, the easier it becomes to recognize them in real conversations. Here's another technique that works amazingly well. Choose a short clip from a TV show, maybe just 30 seconds long. Listen to it once without any subtitles. Don't worry if you don't understand much. Then listen again with English subtitles. Read along while you listen. Then listen a third time without subtitles again. You'll be amazed at how much more you understand the third time. But wait, there's more to this puzzle. One of the biggest reasons why fast English is so hard to understand is because native speakers use a lot of idioms, phrasal verbs, and cultural references that you might not know yet. These expressions don't mean what the individual words suggest, so even if you catch all the words, you might still be confused about the meaning. For example, if someone says it's raining cats and dogs, they don't mean that animals are falling from the sky. They mean it's raining very heavily. If someone says break a leg, they don't want you to actually hurt yourself. They're wishing you good luck. These expressions are everywhere in natural English, and knowing them makes a huge difference in your comprehension. The good news is that you don't need to memorize thousands of idioms to understand fast English. Most conversations use the same common expressions over and over again. If you focus on learning the most frequent ones, you'll see a big improvement in your understanding. Here's what I recommend. Keep a notebook or use an app on your phone to collect new expressions that you hear in movies, TV shows, or conversations. When you hear something that doesn't make sense literally, write it down and look up the meaning later. Then try to use it in your own conversations. This active approach helps the expressions stick in your memory much better than just reading lists of idioms. Now, let's talk about something that many English learners don't realize. Context is your best friend when you're trying to understand fast English. Even native speakers don't catch every single word in fast speech, but we use context clues to fill in the gaps automatically. Think about it like this. If you're watching a scene in a restaurant and you hear someone say something that sounds like, "I'll have the mumble, please," you can guess that they're ordering food, even if you didn't catch the specific item they wanted. If you're watching a scene at an airport and someone says, "Flight 237 to mumble is now boarding," you know they're talking about a flight departure, even if you missed the destination. This is exactly how native speakers handle fast speech too. We use our knowledge of the situation, the topic, and common patterns to understand the overall meaning, even when we don't catch every word. You can train yourself to do this too. Here's a practical way to practice using context. When you're watching English videos, try this technique. Before you turn on the sound, look at the scene and predict what kind of conversation might happen. Are the people in an office? They're probably talking about work. Are they in a kitchen? They might be talking about cooking or what to eat. Are they looking worried? They might be discussing a problem. These predictions help your brain prepare for the type of vocabulary and topics you're likely to hear. It's like warming up before exercise. Your brain is getting ready to process information more efficiently. Let me share another secret that will transform your listening skills. Native speakers use something called backchanneling. These are little sounds and words we make to show that we're listening and following along. We say things like, right, exactly, I see, and oh, really. These aren't really part of the main conversation, but they happen constantly in natural speech. When you're not used to these backchanneling sounds, they can be very confusing. You might think they're important words that you need to understand, but actually, you can mostly ignore them. They're just social glue that keeps the conversation flowing smoothly. Learning to recognize backchanneling will help you focus on the important parts of what people are saying. It's like learning to filter out background noise so you can hear the music more clearly. Here's something else that trips up a lot of English learners. Native speakers often start sentences and then change direction in the middle. We might say something like, I was thinking that we could. Oh, wait, actually, maybe we should just. This happens because we're thinking while we're talking, and sometimes we change our minds or think of a better way to express our idea. Don't let this confuse you. In your native language, people probably do the same thing. It's just part of natural, spontaneous conversation. When you hear someone change direction like this, focus on the most recent part of what they said, because that's usually what they really mean. Now, let me tell you about one of the most powerful techniques for improving your fast English comprehension. It's called shadowing, and it involves listening to English audio and trying to repeat what you hear at the same time, like an echo. You don't need to understand every word to do shadowing. In fact, in the beginning, you're just trying to copy the rhythm and melody of the English, even if you're just making sounds that approximate what you hear. This technique trains your mouth and your ear to work together, and it helps you internalize the natural rhythm of English. Here's how to do shadowing effectively. Choose audio that's just slightly above your current level. Podcasts, audiobooks, or TV shows work great. Start by listening to a short section, maybe 30 seconds, and just trying to copy the sounds and rhythm. Don't worry about perfect pronunciation or understanding every word. Focus on matching the flow and melody of the speech. As you practice shadowing regularly, something amazing happens. Your brain starts to predict what comes next in the speech patterns. You begin to anticipate the rhythm and the common word combinations. This prediction ability is one of the key skills that native speakers use naturally. Let me tell you about another aspect of fast English that often surprises learners. Native speakers use a lot of filler words and hesitation sounds. We say like actually, basically, and I mean constantly. These words don't add meaning to our sentences, but they give us time to think, and they make our speech sound more natural and conversational. When you first start noticing these filler words, you might think they're important vocabulary that you need to learn. But actually, understanding that they're just fillers will help you listen through them to the actual content of what people are saying. Think of filler words like the pauses between musical notes. They're part of the rhythm, but the melody is in the content words. Once you learn to hear past the fillers, conversations become much clearer. Here's a listening exercise that will really sharpen your skills. Find a podcast or YouTube video where people are having a natural conversation, not reading from a script. Listen to a 2-minute section and count how many filler words you hear. This exercise trains you to notice these patterns consciously, which helps you filter them out unconsciously later. Now, let's talk about something that can make fast English comprehension much easier. Learning to recognize common sentence patterns and word combinations. Native speakers don't create completely original sentences every time we talk. We use the same patterns and phrases over and over again. For example, we often use patterns like "I'm thinking about," or "what I mean is," or "the thing is," or "you know what." These patterns signal what type of information is coming next, and recognizing them helps you follow the flow of conversation much more easily. Similarly, certain words tend to go together frequently. We call these collocations. For example, we usually say "make a decision," not "do a decision." We say "heavy rain," not "strong rain." We say "fast food," not "quick food." Learning these common combinations helps you predict what you're likely to hear. Here's a practical way to build your knowledge of these patterns. When you're watching English videos, pay attention to how people start their sentences. What phrases do they use to introduce new ideas? What expressions do they use to agree or disagree? What words do they use to change topics? Start collecting these patterns, and you'll find that conversations become much more predictable. Let me share something that might change your whole approach to listening. Many English learners think that understanding fast English means catching every single word. But that's not how native speakers listen either. We focus on getting the gist, the general meaning, and we let our brains fill in the details. This is called top-down processing, and it's incredibly efficient. Instead of building up meaning word by word, you start with the big picture and work your way down to the details. You use your knowledge of the topic, the situation, and common conversational patterns to understand the overall message. For example, if you're listening to someone tell a story about their vacation, and you hear words like beach, sunny, relaxing, and swimming, you can understand that they had a good time, even if you miss some of the specific details about what they did each day. This approach takes a lot of pressure off your listening. You don't need to panic if you miss a word or two. Focus on catching the key information and let your brain make intelligent guesses about the rest. Here's an exercise to practice top-down processing. Before you listen to any English audio, spend a minute thinking about what you already know about the topic. What vocabulary might you hear? What opinions might people express? What questions might come up? This preparation helps your brain organize the incoming information more effectively. Now, I want to address something that holds many learners back from understanding fast English: the fear of missing something important. This fear actually makes comprehension harder because it creates anxiety, and anxiety interferes with learning and processing information. Let me tell you a secret: native speakers miss things too. In fast conversations, we all miss words, phrases, and sometimes even whole sentences. The difference is that we don't panic about it. We keep listening, use context to figure out what we missed, or we simply ask for clarification. You have the right to ask people to repeat things, to speak more slowly, or to explain what they mean. This isn't a sign of failure, it's a normal part of communication. Even native speakers do this when they're talking to each other. Learning to be comfortable with not understanding everything is actually a key skill for language learning. It allows you to relax and focus on what you can understand, rather than getting stuck on what you can't. Let me talk about another factor that affects fast English comprehension: your listening environment. Background noise, poor audio quality, multiple people talking at once, and visual distractions can all make listening much more challenging, even for native speakers. When you're practicing your listening skills, try to choose high-quality audio with clear sound. Avoid practicing in noisy environments until your skills are more developed. As you improve, you can gradually challenge yourself with more difficult listening conditions. Also, remember that listening to English in person is often easier than listening to recorded audio because you have visual cues to help you. You can see facial expressions, gestures, and body language that give you additional information about meaning and emotion. Here's something interesting about how our brains process fast speech. There's actually a slight delay between when we hear sounds and when we consciously understand them. This processing time is normal and necessary. Your brain is doing incredible work in those milliseconds, connecting sounds to words, words to meanings, and meanings to context. This is why pausing and rewinding when you're practicing with recorded material is so helpful. You're giving your brain extra time to do this processing work. Don't feel bad about needing to listen to things multiple times. Even native speakers sometimes need to replay audio or ask people to repeat themselves. Now, let me share some specific strategies for different types of listening situations. When you're watching movies or TV shows, remember that the dialogue is usually supported by visual context. Use what you see on screen to help you understand what people are saying. The setting, the characters' expressions, and the action can all give you clues about meaning. When you're listening to podcasts or audio-only content, the speakers usually provide more verbal context because they know you can't see what's happening. They might describe situations more explicitly or repeat important information in different ways. When you're in face-to-face conversations, you have the advantage of being able to interact. You can ask questions, request clarification, and guide the conversation toward topics you're more comfortable with. For phone conversations, which many learners find especially challenging, remember that you can always ask the person to speak more slowly or to repeat important information. Most people are happy to accommodate these requests. Let me talk about the role of motivation and interest in understanding fast English. When you're genuinely interested in what someone is saying, your brain works much harder to understand them. This is why it's often easier to understand conversations about topics you care about. This is why I always recommend that learners choose English content that genuinely interests them. If you love cooking, watch cooking shows in English. If you're interested in technology, listen to tech podcasts. If you enjoy comedy, watch comedians performing in English. Your natural interest will boost your comprehension significantly. Conversely, trying to force yourself to understand content that bores you is much more difficult. Your brain doesn't engage as deeply with information that doesn't seem relevant or interesting to you. Here's another practical tip that can make a huge difference. When you're listening to fast English, try to listen for the emotional tone and attitude of the speaker, not just the literal words. Is the person happy, frustrated, excited, worried, sarcastic, or serious? Understanding the emotion helps you interpret the meaning more accurately. For example, if someone says, "Oh, great," In a flat, sarcastic tone, they probably mean the opposite of what the words suggest. If they say the same words with genuine enthusiasm, they mean what they literally said. The tone gives you crucial information about the real meaning. Native speakers use tone, stress, and intonation to convey a lot of meaning that isn't in the actual words. Learning to hear these emotional and attitudinal cues will dramatically improve your comprehension of fast speech. Let me address a common mistake that many English learners make. They try to translate everything they hear into their native language before they understand it. This mental translation takes time, and by the time you've translated the first part of what someone said, they've already moved on to the next part. Instead, try to understand English directly in English. This might feel impossible at first, but it gets easier with practice. Start with simple content and gradually work your way up to more complex material. The goal is to train your brain to process English without the intermediate step of translation. One way to practice this is through visual association. When you hear English words, try to picture the concept or action directly, rather than thinking of the word in your native language first. This creates a direct connection between the English sound and the meaning. Now, let's talk about the importance of regular, consistent practice. Understanding fast English is like developing any other skill. It requires regular exercise. Just like you wouldn't expect to get physically fit by exercising intensively once a week, you can't expect to improve your listening skills with irregular, sporadic practice. Try to listen to English for at least a few minutes every day, even if it's just during your commute or while you're doing household chores. Consistent exposure is much more effective than occasional intensive study sessions. Also, vary the types of English you listen to. Don't just stick to one accent, one type of content, or one level of difficulty. Challenge yourself with different speakers, different topics, and different situations. This variety helps your brain become more flexible and adaptable. Here's something that many learners don't realize. Your listening skills in English will fluctuate depending on your energy level, stress, health, and mood. On some days, you'll understand much more than on other days. This is completely normal. Don't get discouraged if you have bad listening days. Just keep practicing consistently, and your overall trend will be upward. Let me talk about the connection between speaking and listening. Many learners focus only on listening practice, but actually, practicing speaking helps your listening too. When you practice pronouncing English sounds, words, and sentences, you're training your mouth and your ear to work together. This makes it easier to recognize these same sounds when other people say them. Shadowing, which I mentioned earlier, is perfect for this because it combines listening and speaking practice. But you can also practice by reading out loud, having conversations with yourself, or even singing along to English songs. Don't worry about perfect pronunciation when you're doing this speaking practice. The goal is to get familiar with how English feels in your mouth and how it sounds when you produce it. Here's another technique that can accelerate your progress. Active prediction. When you're listening to English content, try to predict what the speaker will say next. Based on the context, the topic, and what you've heard so far, what words or ideas do you expect to hear? This prediction activates your brain and makes you a more engaged listener. Even when your predictions are wrong, the mental effort of making them helps you process the actual information more deeply. You can practice this technique with any type of English content. Pause the audio or video periodically and ask yourself, what do I think they'll talk about next? Or, how do I think this story will end? Then continue listening to see if you were right. Now, let me address a concern that many intermediate English learners have. They say, I can understand English when people speak clearly and slowly, but real life doesn't work that way. How do I bridge this gap? The answer is gradual exposure to faster and more natural speech. Don't jump directly from textbook listening exercises to rapid-fire native speaker conversations. Instead, create a progression for yourself. Start with content that's just slightly faster than what you're comfortable with. News broadcasts are often good for this because the speakers articulate clearly but speak at a natural pace. Then move on to interviews, where the speech is more spontaneous but still relatively clear. Then try documentary narration, casual conversations, and finally, rapid dialogue in movies or comedy shows. Each step should challenge you, but not overwhelm you. If you find yourself understanding less than about 60% of what you hear, the material might be too difficult for your current level. Drop back to easier content and build up more gradually. Let me share some specific recommendations for different learning levels. If you're a beginner, start with children's programs, simple news broadcasts, and educational videos made for English learners. The vocabulary is limited, the grammar is straightforward, and the speech is usually clear and well-paced. If you're at an intermediate level, try sitcoms, talk shows, podcasts on familiar topics, and movies with subtitles. The language is more natural and varied, but the contexts are usually clear and the topics are accessible. If you're at an advanced level, challenge yourself with fast-paced dramas, comedy specials, debates, academic lectures, and professional presentations. These will expose you to sophisticated vocabulary, complex grammar, and rapid speech patterns. Remember, these are general guidelines. Your interests and goals should also influence your choices. It's better to work with content that motivates you, even if it's slightly above or below your ideal level. Here's an important point about accent exposure. While it's fine to focus primarily on one accent, like American English, don't completely avoid other accents. In our globalized world, you'll encounter English speakers from many different countries and regions. The more variety you expose yourself to, the more flexible your listening skills will become. Each accent has its own patterns of pronunciation, rhythm, and vocabulary, but the underlying structure of English remains the same. Once you understand the principles I'm teaching you today, you can adapt them to any English accent you encounter. If you're planning to live, work, or study in a specific English-speaking country, it makes sense to focus more heavily on that accent. But don't make it your only exposure. Let me talk about the role of cultural knowledge in understanding fast English. Language and culture are deeply connected, and native speakers often make references to shared cultural knowledge that might not be obvious to learners. For example, if someone mentions Black Friday, they're not talking about a tragic event. They're referring to the day after Thanksgiving in the United States when many stores have big sales. If someone says, it's not rocket science, they don't mean it's literally about space exploration. They mean it's not very difficult to understand. Building your cultural knowledge alongside your language skills will make fast English much more comprehensible. Watch English language news, read about English-speaking countries, and learn about popular culture, history, and current events. This cultural knowledge acts like a foundation that supports your language comprehension. The more you know about the world that English speakers live in, the easier it becomes to understand their references and assumptions. Now, Let's address the technology available to help you practice. There are many apps, websites, and tools designed to improve listening comprehension. Some allow you to adjust playback speed, repeat sections, and see transcripts. These can be very helpful for practice. However, remember that your ultimate goal is to understand English at natural speed in real-world situations. Use these technological aids as training wheels, but don't become dependent on them. Gradually wean yourself off the slower speeds and the transcript support as your skills improve. Also, be aware that some artificial speech in language learning apps doesn't sound exactly like natural human speech. While these resources can be useful for building vocabulary and grammar skills, make sure you're also getting plenty of exposure to authentic, unscripted English. Here's something that might surprise you. Your physical health affects your ability to understand fast English. When you're tired, stressed, hungry, or distracted, your brain doesn't process information as efficiently. This is true for native speakers too. If you're having trouble with listening comprehension, consider whether physical factors might be contributing to the difficulty. Make sure you're well rested, fed, and in a comfortable environment when you practice. Take breaks when you feel mentally fatigued. Also, remember that learning a language is mentally demanding work. Your brain needs time to consolidate new information and patterns. Getting adequate sleep is crucial for this consolidation process. Let me talk about the importance of celebrating small victories. Understanding fast English is a gradual process, and progress can sometimes feel slow. It's important to notice and celebrate the improvements you make along the way. Maybe today you understood a joke that you wouldn't have gotten last month. Maybe you followed a phone conversation without asking for repetition. Maybe you watched a movie scene without subtitles and got the main idea. These are all significant achievements. Keep a listening journal where you record moments when you successfully understood something challenging. This positive reinforcement will motivate you to continue practicing and will help you see your progress over time. Remember, every native English speaker went through a process of learning to understand fast speech too. As children, we started by understanding only simple, slow speech. We gradually developed the ability to process faster and more complex language through years of exposure and practice. You're essentially doing the same thing, but as an adult with already developed language learning skills. In many ways, this gives you advantages that children don't have. You can analyze patterns, use learning strategies, and approach the challenge systematically. Now, let me give you some specific exercises you can do to improve your fast English comprehension. These are techniques that I've used successfully with students at all levels. Exercise 1. Speed Adjustment Training. Find a video or audio recording of natural English speech. Listen to it at normal speed first and note your comprehension level. Then slow it down to 75% speed and listen again. Notice how much more you understand. Then try 50% speed. Finally, return to normal speed. You'll often find that your comprehension at normal speed has improved after this exercise. Exercise 2. Chunk Recognition. Listen to a short piece of audio and try to identify meaningful chunks of words rather than individual words. For example, instead of hearing I am going to the store, try to hear I'm going and to the store as units of meaning. Exercise 3. Prediction Practice. Before listening to any audio, spend 30 seconds predicting what you might hear based on the title, topic, or context. Make a mental list of vocabulary you expect to encounter. This primes your brain for more efficient processing. Exercise 4. Emotion recognition. Listen to the audio and focus only on identifying the speaker's emotions and attitudes, not the literal words. Are they happy, sad, excited, frustrated, sarcastic, or serious? This trains you to hear the prosodic features of English. Exercise 5. Gist training. Listen to longer pieces of audio and practice summarizing the main points in just 1 or 2 sentences. Don't worry about details, focus on the big picture. This develops your top-down processing skills. Let me share some common mistakes that learners make when trying to understand fast English so you can avoid them. The first mistake is trying to understand every single word. This creates a bottleneck in your processing and actually makes comprehension more difficult. The second mistake is getting stuck on unfamiliar words or phrases. If you hear something you don't understand, don't stop and dwell on it. Keep listening and use context to figure out the overall meaning. The third mistake is avoiding challenging content. Some learners stick with easy material for too long because it feels comfortable. While building confidence is important, you also need to gradually increase the difficulty to continue improving. The fourth mistake is not practicing regularly. Listening skills deteriorate quickly without consistent practice. Even 10 or 15 minutes of daily practice is better than several hours once a week. The fifth mistake is comparing yourself to others. Everyone learns at their own pace, and everyone has different strengths and challenges. Focus on your own progress rather than comparing yourself to other learners. Now, let's talk about dealing with different speaking styles. Not all native speakers talk the same way. Some people naturally speak quickly, others speak slowly. Some articulate very clearly, others mumble or slur their words. Some use lots of slang and idioms, while others speak more formally. The key is to expose yourself to as much variety as possible. Don't just listen to news anchors who are trained to speak clearly. Also, listen to teenagers, elderly people, people from different social backgrounds, and people in different emotional states. This variety might seem overwhelming at first, but it's actually beneficial. The more different speaking styles you encounter, the more adaptable your listening skills become. You develop the ability to quickly adjust to different speakers and different situations. Here's a technique for dealing with speakers who are particularly difficult to understand. Focus on getting the general topic and the speaker's attitude first. Don't worry about the details initially. Once you have the basic framework, you can fill in more specific information on subsequent listens. For example, if you're listening to someone with a strong accent or someone who speaks very quickly, first ask yourself, what are they talking about in general? Do they seem happy, angry, excited, or worried about it? Are they telling a story, giving instructions, making an argument, or asking for help? These big picture questions help you create a framework for understanding, even when the details are unclear. Let me address a question that many learners ask. Should I use subtitles when watching English videos? The answer depends on your goals and your current level. If you're a beginner, subtitles in your native language can help you follow the story while you get used to the sounds of English. But don't rely on them too heavily, or you'll focus on reading rather than listening. If you're at an intermediate level, English subtitles can be very helpful. They show you how written English corresponds to spoken English, which helps with connected speech patterns. Try watching the same content first with subtitles, then without. If you're at an advanced level, challenge yourself to watch without any subtitles most of the time. Use subtitles only when you want to check your understanding or learn specific vocabulary. Remember, the ultimate goal is to understand spoken English without any written support, just like you do in real-life conversations. Here's an important point about patience and persistence. Understanding fast English is not a skill that develops overnight. It requires months or even years of consistent practice. There will be periods where you feel like you're not making progress, and periods where you suddenly seem to understand much more. This is completely normal. Language learning involves plateaus and breakthroughs. During the plateau periods, your brain is actually doing important work behind the scenes, consolidating patterns and preparing for the next breakthrough. Don't give up during the difficult periods. Keep practicing consistently, vary your learning activities, and trust that improvement is happening even when it's not immediately obvious. Let me talk about the role of confidence in listening comprehension. Anxiety and self-doubt can actually interfere with your ability to understand fast English. When you're worried about not understanding, your brain uses energy for worry instead of processing the language. Try to approach listening practice with a relaxed, curious attitude. Instead of thinking, "I hope I understand this," try thinking, "I wonder what I'll be able to catch from this." This subtle shift in mindset can make a significant difference in your comprehension. Also, remember that not understanding everything is okay. Even native speakers don't catch every word in fast speech. Focus on understanding enough to get the main message, and don't pressure yourself to achieve perfect comprehension. Now, let's discuss the importance of authentic materials. While structured learning materials have their place, authentic English content, things created for native speakers rather than for language learners, provides the most realistic practice for understanding fast English. Authentic materials include movies, TV shows, podcasts, radio programs, YouTube videos, phone conversations, and live speeches. This content uses natural speech patterns, authentic vocabulary, and real-world contexts. Start with authentic materials that have visual support, like movies and TV shows. Then gradually move to audio-only content, like podcasts and radio programs. The visual context helps bridge the gap between your current comprehension level and natural speech. Here's a specific strategy for working with authentic materials. Choose content that's slightly above your current comfort level. Watch or listen to a short section, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, without any support. Note how much you understand. Then watch or listen again with English subtitles or a transcript if available. Finally, watch or listen a third time without support. This three-step process helps you identify the gaps between what you can understand and what was actually said. Over time, these gaps will become smaller and smaller. Let me address the challenge of understanding different generations of English speakers. Teenagers, middle-aged adults, and elderly people often use different vocabulary, different references, and sometimes different grammatical patterns. Teenagers and young adults tend to use more slang, more recent cultural references, and sometimes simplified grammar structures. They also tend to speak faster and use more filler words. Middle-aged adults often use more formal vocabulary in professional contexts, but casual language in personal conversations. They make references to popular culture from their youth and early adulthood. Elderly people might use vocabulary and expressions that are less common in modern English. They might also speak more slowly and articulate more clearly, which can actually make them easier to understand in some ways. The key is to expose yourself to speakers from different age groups so you become familiar with these variations. Don't limit yourself to just one demographic when choosing your listening practice materials. Let me talk about regional differences within the same language. American English sounds different in New York than it does in Texas, which sounds different from California English. British English varies significantly between London, Scotland, and Northern England. Australian English has its own distinct characteristics. While these regional differences might seem overwhelming, remember that the core language remains the same. The basic grammar, most of the vocabulary, and the fundamental communication patterns are consistent across regions. The differences are primarily in pronunciation, rhythm, and some specific vocabulary choices. If you're planning to live or work in a specific region, it makes sense to focus on that accent. But don't avoid other regional varieties entirely. Exposure to variety makes you a more flexible listener overall. Here's something that many learners don't consider: the difference between planned and spontaneous speech. When people give prepared presentations, read news, or deliver speeches, their English is usually more formal, better organized, and easier to understand. When people have casual conversations, tell spontaneous stories, or speak in interviews, their English is more natural but also more challenging to follow. Spontaneous speech includes more false starts, where people begin sentences and then restart them. It includes more hesitations, repetitions, and corrections. People might use incomplete sentences, jump between topics, or assume shared knowledge that isn't explicitly stated. This is normal. This is how people really talk in everyday situations. Learning to understand spontaneous speech is crucial for real-world communication. To practice with spontaneous speech, try listening to unscripted interviews, casual conversation videos, reality TV shows, or live streaming content. These sources give you exposure to how people really talk when they're not reading from a script. Now, let me share some insights about the relationship between vocabulary knowledge and listening comprehension. You might think that you need to know every word to understand fast speech, but that's not true. Research shows that you can understand the main message of spoken English even if you don't know 20 to 30% of the individual words. However, there is a threshold effect. If you don't know more than about 30% of the words, comprehension becomes very difficult. This is why building your vocabulary is important, but it's not the only factor in understanding fast English. Focus on learning high-frequency words first. These are the words that appear most often in spoken English. Lists of the most common 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 English words are widely available online. If you know these high-frequency words well, you'll understand a large percentage of most conversations. Also, pay attention to word families and collocations. When you learn a new word, also learn the related words and the common phrases it appears in. This helps you recognize words more quickly in connected speech. Let me discuss the importance of prosody in understanding fast English. Prosody refers to the rhythm, stress, and intonation patterns of language. English has very distinctive prosodic patterns, and understanding these patterns is crucial for comprehension. English is a stress-timed language, which means that stressed syllables occur at roughly regular intervals, regardless of how many unstressed syllables come between them. This creates English's characteristic bouncy rhythm. Word stress is also important. In English, changing the stress in a word can change its meaning or part of speech. For example, R-cord is a noun, but ray-cord is a verb. Conflict is a noun, but conflict is a verb. Sentence stress, which I mentioned earlier, helps listeners identify the most important information in each sentence. Learning to hear these stress patterns will dramatically improve your comprehension of fast speech. Here's an exercise to practice hearing stress patterns. Listen to English audio and tap your finger or nod your head along with the stressed syllables. Don't worry about understanding the words initially, just focus on feeling the rhythm of the language. You can also practice this with English songs. Music makes the rhythm very obvious, and singing along helps you internalize these patterns. Choose songs with clear lyrics and distinctive rhythms for the best practice. Let me address a common frustration that many learners experience. You might find that you can understand English perfectly well when you're focused and paying full attention, but as soon as you relax or get distracted, your comprehension drops significantly. This is completely normal. Understanding a foreign language requires more mental energy than understanding your native language. As you become more proficient, this will require less conscious effort, but in the beginning, active listening is necessary. Don't expect to understand English as background noise while you're doing other tasks. Give your listening practice your full attention, especially when you're working with challenging material. However, you can gradually train yourself to understand English in more distracting environments. Start by practicing in quiet, ideal conditions. Then gradually introduce mild distractions, background noise, or multitasking. This builds your ability to filter out irrelevant information and focus on the English content. Here's something important about the role of context in fast speech. Native speakers rely heavily on situational and cultural context to understand each other, and you can learn to do the same thing. If you're listening to a conversation at a coffee shop, certain vocabulary and topics are highly predictable. If you're watching a medical drama, you can expect medical terminology and hospital situations. If you're listening to a sports broadcast, sports vocabulary and commentary patterns are likely. Use this predictability to your advantage. Before you listen to any English content, think about the context and activate your relevant background knowledge. What do you already know about this topic? What vocabulary might be relevant? What types of conversations or information are likely in this situation? This preparation helps your brain process the incoming information more efficiently because you've already activated the relevant mental frameworks. Let me talk about the difference between comprehension and perfect accuracy. Many learners set the bar too high for themselves. They think they haven't truly understood something unless they caught every single word and understood every nuance. But even native speakers don't achieve this level of perfect accuracy all the time. We understand the gist, we catch the important details, and we ask for clarification when necessary. This is normal and effective communication. Set realistic goals for your listening comprehension. Aim to understand the main message, the speaker's attitude, and the key details. Don't worry about catching every preposition, every article, or every filler word. As your skills improve, your accuracy will naturally increase. But don't let the pursuit of perfection prevent you from celebrating your current level of understanding. Here's a technique that can help you improve your accuracy gradually. After listening to a piece of English content, try to summarize what you heard in your own words. Don't worry about using the exact same words or structures that the original speaker used. Focus on capturing the meaning. Then, if possible, check your summary against the original content or against subtitles. This helps you identify whether you understood the main message correctly, even if you missed some of the specific details. Now, let me address the emotional aspects of learning to understand fast English. This process can be frustrating, discouraging, and sometimes overwhelming. These feelings are completely normal and don't mean that you're not capable of success. Language learning involves a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty. You have to be comfortable with not understanding everything, with making mistakes, and with gradually building your skills over time. This requires patience with yourself and confidence in your ability to improve. When you feel frustrated, remember that every successful English speaker went through this same process. The challenge you're facing is not unique to you, and it's not a sign that you lack ability. It's simply part of the learning journey. Celebrate small victories, be patient with setbacks, and maintain a long-term perspective. Focus on your progress over weeks and months, not day-to-day fluctuations in your comprehension. Let me share some thoughts about the role of technology in practicing fast English comprehension. There are many apps, websites, and tools available, and they can be helpful supplements to your learning. However, they shouldn't be your only source of practice. Apps that adjust playback speed can be useful for gradual training. You can start with slower speeds and gradually increase to normal pace. Apps that provide interactive transcripts let you click on words you don't understand. Apps that focus on specific skills like pronunciation or vocabulary can support your overall comprehension development. However, remember that your ultimate goal is to understand real human speech in real situations. Make sure that technology-enhanced practice is balanced with exposure to authentic, unmodified English content. Also, be cautious about becoming too dependent on technological aids. Use them as training tools, but gradually reduce your reliance on them as your skills improve. Here's an important point about individual learning differences. Everyone has different strengths and preferences when it comes to language learning. Some people are naturally better auditory learners, while others benefit more from visual support. Some people prefer structured, systematic practice, while others learn better through immersion in authentic content. Pay attention to what works best for you. If you learn better with visual support, use subtitles and video content. If you prefer audio-only practice, focus on podcasts and radio programs. If you like structured progression, use graded listening materials. If you prefer authentic content, dive into movies and real conversations. There's no single right way to learn to understand fast English. The best approach is the one that keeps you motivated, engaged, and consistently practicing. However, don't limit yourself exclusively to your preferred learning style. Occasionally, challenge yourself with different approaches to build more comprehensive skills. Let me talk about the importance of active versus passive listening. Passive listening, where English is playing in the background while you do other things, has some value for getting used to the sounds and rhythms of English. However, it's not sufficient for developing strong comprehension skills. Active listening, where you focus your full attention on understanding the English content, is much more effective for skill development. This is where you should spend most of your dedicated practice time. During active listening, you're consciously trying to understand, making predictions, checking your comprehension, and noting areas of difficulty. This mental engagement is what drives improvement. However, passive listening can be a useful supplement. It can help you maintain your English exposure during busy periods and it can help you get comfortable with the background sounds of English. Here's a strategy that combines both approaches. Start with active listening to a piece of content until you understand it reasonably well. Then let the same content play passively while you do other activities. This passive repetition helps reinforce what you learned during active listening. Now, let me address the question of whether you should focus on one accent or expose yourself to many different accents. This depends on your goals and your current level. If you're a beginner, it can be helpful to focus primarily on one accent until you develop basic comprehension skills. Trying to understand too many different accents simultaneously can be overwhelming when you're still learning fundamental patterns. If you're at an intermediate or advanced level, exposure to accent variety becomes more beneficial. In our globalized world, you're likely to encounter English speakers from many different backgrounds. The more accents you're familiar with, the more adaptable your listening skills will be. Even if you choose to focus on one accent, don't completely avoid others. Occasional exposure to a variety helps prevent your listening skills from becoming too narrow. Remember that all English accents share the same basic grammar, most of the same vocabulary, and similar communication patterns. The differences are primarily in pronunciation and rhythm. Once you understand the fundamental principles of English listening comprehension, you can apply them to any accent. Let me share some specific advice for understanding different English accents. British English often has more precise consonant sounds and different vowel pronunciations compared to American English. The rhythm can also be different, with different patterns of stress and intonation. Australian English has some unique vowel sounds and tends to have a rising intonation pattern, even for statements. Some vocabulary is also different from American or British English. Indian English, which you might encounter frequently in international contexts, often has different stress patterns and rhythm compared to native speaker accents. However, it often has very clear consonant pronunciation, which can actually make it easier to understand in some ways. The key to understanding any accent is exposure and patience. Don't expect to understand a new accent immediately. Give yourself time to adjust to the new sounds and patterns. Here's something that might surprise you about native speaker listening skills. We don't actually hear every sound that people produce. Our brains fill in missing or unclear sounds based on context, expectation, and our knowledge of common word patterns. This is called phoneme restoration, and it happens automatically. For example, if someone says a word but a cough covers up one of the sounds, we often don't even notice that the sound was missing. Our brain fills it in automatically. You can train your brain to do this in English too. The more familiar you become with English word patterns, common phrases, and typical conversation flows, the better your brain becomes at filling in missing information. This is another reason why building vocabulary and learning common expressions is so important. It's not just about knowing more words. It's about giving your brain more tools for prediction and gap filling. Let me talk about the role of background knowledge in listening comprehension. The more you know about a topic, the easier it is to understand conversations about that topic, even when the speech is fast or unclear. This is why you might find it easier to understand English content about subjects you're already familiar with. Your background knowledge helps you predict vocabulary, understand references, and follow the logic of what people are saying. You can use this to your advantage by choosing English content about topics you already know well. If you're an engineer, listen to English content about technology and engineering. If you love cooking, watch English cooking shows. If you're interested in history, listen to English history podcasts. This approach allows you to focus on language learning rather than trying to understand completely new information at the same time. As your English listening skills improve, you can gradually branch out into less familiar topics. Here's an important point about the relationship between reading and listening skills. These skills support each other, but they're not identical. You might find that you can read English much better than you can understand spoken English, or vice versa. Reading can help your listening by building vocabulary, familiarizing you with sentence structures, and improving your overall English proficiency. When you know more English words and grammar patterns, it's easier to recognize them in speech. However, reading practice alone won't give you good listening skills. Spoken English has features like connected speech, stress patterns, and intonation that don't exist in written English. You need specific listening practice to develop these skills. The most effective approach combines both reading and listening practice, with extra emphasis on whichever skill is weaker for you. Let me discuss the importance of motivation and goal setting for improving your fast English comprehension. Having clear, specific goals helps you stay focused and motivated during the challenging parts of the learning process. Instead of vague goals like, I want to understand English better, try specific goals like, I want to understand 80% of casual conversations between native speakers, or I want to watch an entire movie without subtitles and understand the main story. Break these large goals down into smaller, achievable steps. For example, if your goal is to watch movies without subtitles, you might start with animated movies, which often have clearer speech, then move to comedies, then dramas, and finally action movies with rapid dialogue. Having measurable goals also helps you track your progress. Keep a learning journal where you record your listening achievements, challenges, and improvements. This gives you concrete evidence of your progress, which can be very motivating during difficult periods. Now, let me address the question of when you should challenge yourself with more difficult content versus when you should stick with easier material. This balance is crucial for effective learning. If the content is too easy, you won't be challenged enough to improve. If the content is too difficult, you'll become frustrated and may not learn effectively. The ideal difficulty level is just above your current comfort zone, challenging enough to promote growth but not so difficult that it's overwhelming. A good rule of thumb is that you should understand about 70 to 80% of what you hear. If you understand much more than that, the content might be too easy. If you understand much less than that, it might be too difficult. However, it's also okay to occasionally challenge yourself with very difficult content, as long as you don't expect to understand everything. Sometimes exposure to challenging material helps you realize how much you've already learned and motivates you to continue improving. Similarly, it's okay to occasionally return to easier content, especially when you want to build confidence or review fundamental skills. Here's something important about dealing with frustration and plateaus in your learning. There will be times when you feel like you're not making progress, when fast English seems just as difficult as it did weeks or months ago. These plateaus are a normal part of language learning. During these periods, your brain is actually consolidating the patterns and skills you've been practicing. The improvement is happening beneath the surface, even though you can't see it yet. During plateau periods, it's important to maintain consistent practice even though progress isn't obvious. Often, a breakthrough comes right after a plateau period, and you suddenly realize that you can understand much more than you could before. Don't change your entire approach during a plateau. Instead, try adding some variety to your practice, or take a short break if you're feeling burned out. Then return to consistent practice with confidence that improvement is happening. Let me share some thoughts about the social aspects of learning to understand fast English. Language is fundamentally social, and practicing with other people can accelerate your progress significantly. If you have opportunities to have conversations with native English speakers, take advantage of them. Don't worry about perfect comprehension or perfect speaking. Focus on communication and understanding the main messages. If you don't have access to native speakers in person, look for online conversation groups, language exchange programs, or conversation practice apps. Even brief conversations can provide valuable listening practice. When you're practicing with other people, don't be afraid to ask them to repeat something, speak more slowly, or explain what they mean. Most people are happy to help, and these clarification requests are a normal part of communication, even between native speakers. Also, pay attention to how native speakers handle situations when they don't understand each other. They ask questions like, "What do you mean?" Or, "Could you say that again?" Or, "I didn't catch that." Learning these clarification strategies is just as important as improving your raw comprehension skills. Here's an important point about perfectionism in language learning. Many learners feel that they haven't truly understood something unless they caught every word and understood every nuance. This perfectionist mindset can actually hinder progress. Native speakers don't understand every single word in fast speech either. We focus on getting the main message and the important details. We use context to fill in gaps, and we ask for clarification when necessary. Embrace good enough comprehension. If you understand who is talking, what they're generally talking about, and their attitude toward the topic, you're doing well. Perfect comprehension will develop gradually as your skills improve. Don't let perfectionism prevent you from engaging with challenging content or participating in conversations. It's better to understand 70% of a conversation and participate actively than to avoid the conversation entirely because you can't understand everything. Let me talk about the importance of consistency over intensity in your listening practice. Many learners try to do intensive listening practice for several hours once or twice a week, but this is less effective than shorter, daily practice sessions. Your brain needs regular exposure to English sounds and patterns to develop automatic recognition skills. Daily practice, even just 15 or 20 minutes, is much more effective than occasional long sessions. Think of it like physical exercise. You wouldn't expect to get fit by exercising intensively once a week. Consistent, regular practice is what builds strong skills. Try to integrate English listening into your daily routine. Listen to English podcasts during your commute, watch English videos during lunch breaks, or put on English content while you do household chores. These small, consistent exposures add up to significant progress over time. Here's a strategy for making listening practice more engaging and sustainable. Instead of treating it as a chore, find ways to make it enjoyable and personally meaningful. Choose content that genuinely interests you. If you love mysteries, watch English detective shows. If you're interested in science, listen to science podcasts. If you enjoy comedy, watch English comedians. Make listening practice social by discussing what you've heard with friends or family. Join online communities where people discuss English movies, shows, or podcasts. Set up rewards for yourself when you achieve listening goals. Maybe you'll buy yourself something special when you can understand an entire podcast episode, or you'll celebrate when you watch your first movie without subtitles. Now, let me address some common misconceptions about understanding fast English. The first misconception is that you need to have perfect pronunciation to understand spoken English well. While speaking practice can help with your listening, many people with limited speaking skills can still understand spoken English very well. The second misconception is that you need to understand every cultural reference to follow conversations. While cultural knowledge helps, most conversations can be understood through context, even if you miss some specific references. The third misconception is that some people are naturally better at languages and others aren't. While people do have different strengths and learning preferences, anyone can improve their listening comprehension with appropriate practice and patience. The fourth misconception is that you need expensive courses or materials to improve. While good resources can help, there's an enormous amount of free English content available online that can provide excellent listening practice. Let me talk about the role of emotional connection in language learning. When you have an emotional response to English content, whether it's laughter, excitement, curiosity, or even frustration, your brain processes and remembers that content more effectively. This is why entertainment content like movies, TV shows, and podcasts can be so effective for language learning. When you're emotionally engaged, you pay more attention, and the information sticks better in your memory. Try to choose listening practice materials that evoke some kind of emotional response. This might be content that makes you laugh, content about topics you care deeply about, or content that tells compelling stories. Don't limit yourself to educational content designed specifically for language learners. While these materials have their place, authentic content that was created to entertain, inform, or persuade native speakers often provides more engaging and memorable listening practice. Here's something important about managing your expectations for progress. Understanding fast English is a complex skill that develops gradually over months and years. Don't expect linear progress or rapid transformation. Some days you'll feel like you understand everything, and other days you'll feel like you've forgotten everything you learned. This variation is completely normal and doesn't indicate that you're not improving overall. Focus on long-term trends rather than day-to-day fluctuations. Keep track of your progress over weeks and months, not individual practice sessions. Also, remember that different types of listening comprehension develop at different rates. You might find that you can understand movies better than phone conversations, or that you understand news broadcasts better than casual conversations. This is normal. Different contexts present different challenges. Let me share some final thoughts about building confidence in your listening skills. Confidence and competence support each other. When you feel confident, you tend to perform better, and when you perform better, you feel more confident. Start building confidence by setting yourself up for success. Choose listening materials that are slightly easier than your maximum challenge level when you want to build confidence. Save the most challenging materials for when you're feeling strong and motivated. Celebrate your successes, no matter how small they might seem. Did you understand a joke in English? That's an achievement. Did you follow a phone conversation without major confusion? That's progress. Did you watch a movie scene and understand the emotional subtext? That's sophisticated comprehension. Keep a record of these victories. When you're feeling discouraged, review your list of achievements to remind yourself how much you've already learned. Remember that every expert was once a beginner. Every native English speaker you admire for their clear communication went through a process of learning to understand and use language effectively. Your journey is part of this universal human experience of language learning. The path to understanding fast English like a native isn't always easy, but it's absolutely achievable with patience, consistency, and the right approaches. Focus on gradual progress, celebrate your improvements, and maintain confidence in your ability to succeed. You have all the tools you need to master this skill. Your brain is already an expert at processing language. It just needs time and practice to extend that expertise to English. Trust the process, stay consistent with your practice, and enjoy the journey of discovery as the English-speaking world becomes more and more accessible to you. Every conversation you understand, every movie you follow, every joke you catch is evidence of your growing ability. You're not just learning to understand English, you're opening doors to new relationships, new opportunities, and new ways of seeing the world. Keep practicing, stay motivated, and remember that understanding fast English like a native is not just a dream, it's a goal that you can absolutely achieve with time and dedication. You've got this.